Evan and Lila never believed in the old town legends, but on Beggars Night, their disbelief became a dangerous mistake. As the streets emptied and shadows stretched unnaturally, they discovered that some traditions were meant to be feared, and some candy was never meant for children. It was the night before Halloween, a night the locals in my new town called Beggars Night. I had moved here only a few months ago and had never heard of the tradition. They said that on this night, children went door to door collecting candy a day early, leaving Halloween itself free for the spirits that roamed the streets. I didn't believe any of it. Superstitions had never scared me. Yet as I walked home from my evening shift at the diner, a cold unease began creeping over me. The streets were unusually empty. No laughter, no excited shouts of children, not even the occasional car passing by. Every house I passed had its porch light on, but they flickered weakly, like the bulbs were struggling to stay alive. Plastic skeletons swayed in the thin wind, their hollow eyes catching the dim orange glow of the streetlights. Even the usual rustle of leaves seemed muted, swallowed by the stillness that hung over the town. I tried to shake off the feeling and quicken my pace. The air felt heavier with every step, almost as if it was pressing against my chest. Then I heard it, a faint sound behind me. Footsteps, but not the normal rhythm of someone walking. These dragged slowly, unevenly across the pavement. I spun around, but the street stretched back, empty and silent. My heartbeat raced as I continued home, keeping my eyes on the ground, but the sensation of being watched didn't leave. I reached the corner of Maple Street and froze. There, in the middle of the road, was a lone candy bucket. It was orange, cracked, and looked like it had been abandoned for years, yet inside was a single chocolate bar. Curiosity overcame me for a moment, and I bent down to pick it up. The wrapper was wet, sticky, and smelled faintly metallic. I recoiled in horror when I noticed the streaks of red smeared across my fingers. I dropped the bucket, heart pounding, and the chocolate bar rolled slightly on the asphalt. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, low, almost pleading, coming from somewhere behind me. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a child crying. I spun around again, but the street remained empty. My chest tightened, and I could feel panic bubbling up. I ran the rest of the way to my apartment, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the still night. When I finally reached the door, I stopped dead. There, on my doormat, was the candy bucket, the same one from the street. It hadn't moved an inch since I had dropped it, yet somehow it was now sitting in front of my door. I stared at it, frozen. The chocolate bar inside glimmered faintly under the dim hallway light, and the smell of metal grew stronger. My fingers itched to touch it, to throw it away, but I couldn't move. The whispering had returned, coming now from the bucket itself, soft and impossible to place. For the first time in my life, I realized that some traditions were not meant to be ignored. Some nights, some places, held shadows that lingered far too long, and some candy was never meant for children. Sleep didn't come that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the faint whispering from the candy bucket, a low, pleading sound that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. By midnight, the wind outside had grown colder, carrying with it a damp, earthy smell, like something had been dug up and left to rot. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate, 3 sharp taps. I froze. At first, I thought it was my apartment door, but when I realized it was coming from the window, a wave of panic swept over me. I hesitated, then pulled the curtain back just enough to peek through the glass. The street below was empty, cloaked in shadows, the mist curling along the sidewalks like ghostly fingers. For a moment, I thought I had imagined the sound, but then I saw it, a small figure, under the flickering streetlight across the road. It was standing perfectly still, facing my building, holding a tattered candy bag. Its head was too still, its posture too rigid to be a normal child, and the mask it wore reflected the light eerily, white and expressionless, with a painted grin that felt entirely wrong. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light or maybe a decoration someone had left outside. Yet the unease crawling up my spine refused to fade. I tried to focus on anything else, anything normal, the hum of the street lights, the soft rustle of the wind, but nothing felt normal anymore. Then the knocking returned, louder this time, closer, coming from the opposite side of the room. My heart pounded as I turned, staring at the second window. And there it was, another figure, identical to the first, mask painted in the same cruel smile, small frame stiff and unyielding. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. My body refused to move. The minutes stretched endlessly. I watched, paralyzed, as the two figures remained under the flickering light, heads tilting slightly as if sensing my gaze. They didn't move closer, didn't run, didn't even blink, but I could feel their attention pressing against me, heavy and inescapable. My reflection in the glass looked wrong, hollow-eyed, pale, as if my own fear had etched itself into my face overnight. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me screamed that I should call the police, that I should run, that I should do something, anything. But when I reached for the phone, the battery was dead. Not low, completely dead. The screen black as if it had never existed. I didn't sleep again that night. I stayed crouched near the corner of my bed, watching the window, listening to every creak, every whisper, every scrape that might signal them moving closer. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had no way of telling. At dawn, exhausted, I forced myself to look outside. The figures were gone, vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. The street was empty again, silent, normal, or as close to normal as anything could feel after that night. When I stepped to the door, the candy bucket was there, waiting, empty this time, but still emitting that faint metallic scent. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, bury it, anything to rid myself of it. But when I touched the handle, I froze. Beneath it, scratched into the wood, were small markings. 3 tiny stick figures, identical to the masks, each one twisted into a shape that made my stomach twist. I dropped the bucket and stepped back, heart racing. Something about those figures felt alive, watching, patient. And as I backed into the corner of the room, I realized with sinking certainty that the night was far from over. By the next morning, I couldn't go to work. I told myself it was just exhaustion, nerves, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The town seemed drained of color, the usual autumn brightness muted under a dull gray sky. Even the leaves seemed quieter, as if they had learned to move in silence to avoid the creatures that haunted the streets the night before. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see those masked figures waiting, staring, calculating. I decided I had to investigate, to understand what I was dealing with. I walked outside, the crisp air biting at my skin. The streets were empty as before, but now there was something more: footprints. Small, deep impressions in the damp earth and the soft asphalt, leading from the edge of the road to my apartment steps. They were too small for an adult, too deep for a normal child. And they ended directly at my front door. My stomach churned as I followed them with my eyes. The air felt heavier, charged, like the silence itself was pressing in on me. My reflection in the glass of my apartment building's windows looked wrong, distorted, almost hollow. I couldn't recognize the fear etched on my own face. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet I felt rooted to the spot, a helpless observer in my own nightmare. I reached the spot where the first masked figure had stood under the streetlight. There was nothing there now, only the wet pavement, cold and unwelcoming. But then I noticed something else. Scratches in the concrete, shallow but deliberate, forming shapes I didn't immediately understand. Stick figures, 3 of them crudely etched, one clearly wearing a mask. The sight of them made my stomach turn. It wasn't just a prank. This was deliberate, targeted, personal. I tried to shake off the dread and decided I needed to get rid of the candy bucket once and for all. I grabbed it and walked to the dumpster behind the building. When I dropped it in, the clatter echoed far too loudly, the sound bouncing back at me as if the night itself were laughing. Relieved, I turned to head back inside, but something on the ground caught my eye. Another set of scratches, forming more stick figures, leading back toward my building. My pulse spiked. I wasn't imagining it. The marks were fresh, as though whatever had done them had moved with a purpose. I stumbled back, heart hammering, noticing a faint, sticky trail on the concrete. I looked closer and felt bile rise in my throat. It was dark red, smeared across the shapes as though they had been drawn in blood. By the time I reached my apartment door, I was shaking uncontrollably. I tried to convince myself it was some elaborate prank, some sick joke by kids in the neighborhood. But then I saw it. The candy bucket, sitting neatly by the door again, untouched, full, as if it had been waiting for me. I wanted to throw it away, smash it, anything, but I couldn't. It radiated something alive, something patient, something hungry. And then I heard it, the faintest sound of breathing. Not from outside, not from behind the door, but from within the bucket itself. My stomach dropped. I couldn't tell if it was human, animal, or something else entirely. The whispering had returned, soft, pleading, and impossibly close. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The world had shifted. The town, the streets, even the air itself seemed like it belonged to someone else now. And I understood in a cold, terrifying clarity. I was no longer alone. By the next night, I no longer tried to convince myself that this was just imagination. The fear had settled into my bones, unshakable, a constant weight pressing down on me. Beggars Night had officially begun, but the streets were still empty, eerily silent. Houses sat dark, their lights either extinguished or flickering weakly. The usual signs of life, children laughing, dogs barking, leaves rustling, were gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness that made my skin crawl. Every shadow seemed too heavy, every corner too dark, and every sound carried a sinister edge. As darkness fell, I felt the first soft scraping along my apartment door. My heart thumped painfully in my chest as I pressed my ear against the wood. The sound was deliberate, slow, almost cautious, like someone, or something, was testing the threshold of my space. Then came the whispering, soft and insistent, like 100 tiny voices speaking at once. I couldn't make out the words at first, but they carried an impossible weight, the sound of desperate pleading mixed with menace. I tried to retreat, but my legs felt stiff, unresponsive. The scraping grew louder, and then something slid under the door. I stared, frozen, as a piece of paper landed silently at my feet. Trembling, I picked it up. The edges were torn, the paper yellowed and fragile. Written across it in quivering, uneven letters were 3 simple words: trick us or treat us. My stomach lurched, and I dropped the note, my mind racing to comprehend what it meant. The whispering stopped, replaced by silence, the kind that feels alive as if the air itself were holding its breath. And then, slowly, almost playfully, the doorknob began to turn. I froze, unable to speak, unable to move. It turned just slightly, testing, teasing, pausing as if measuring my reaction. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and fell over the candy bucket that had inexplicably reappeared in the middle of the room. This time, it was overflowing, crammed with wrapped candy I hadn't seen before. The wrappers twitched, as though something inside was moving, trying to escape. My stomach twisted in fear. I wanted to throw it away, run, lock myself in the bedroom, anything. But my body refused to obey. The whispering resumed, closer now, circling the room like a predator. It was low, mournful, impossible to ignore. Each voice seemed to push against the walls, pressing into my skull, echoing in the corners of my mind. I pressed myself into a corner, eyes fixed on the door, praying they wouldn't enter. The bucket shifted slightly, the candy rustling, the sound almost organic, almost alive. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. This was not about candy. It was about me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The whispering never stopped, the scraping never ended, and the bucket never stayed still. Exhausted, terrified, and utterly alone, I understood that whatever Beggars Night was, it wasn't a tradition to celebrate. It was a warning, and from somewhere deep inside, the bucket came a soft, wet sound, like breathing, but slower, deliberate, waiting. Something alive, or something that once had been alive, was inside, and it knew I was awake. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't think. I could only watch as the shadows in the room lengthened, twisted, and seemed to lean closer. The night was far from over, and whatever was coming wasn't asking permission. I woke up on the floor before dawn, my body stiff, my mind numb. The room was quiet, but the air felt wrong, thick, humid, and heavy, as if it carried the weight of something unseen. My heart still raced, and my fingers itched from the faint, sticky residue left by the candy bucket, which now lay empty and overturned in the middle of the floor. The wrappers were scattered around, fluttering slightly as though they had a life of their own. I tried to convince myself it had all been a nightmare, that exhaustion had warped my senses. But when I glanced at my phone, a single notification made my stomach drop. It was a local alert. Stay indoors. Do not open your doors to any visitors. Beggars Night extended due to public safety concerns. The words on the screen felt like a warning carved into stone, not typed by a distant authority. Then came the knock. 3 soft, deliberate raps that seemed impossibly close, though I hadn't moved. My chest tightened as I forced myself to look through the peephole. The hallway outside was crowded. Dozens of figures lined the corridor, each wearing a pale mask and holding an empty candy bucket. Their heads tilted slightly in perfect unison, all staring directly at my door. I couldn't see eyes, only the empty white masks. And yet I felt them watching me, studying me, waiting. I pressed my body against the door, trying to convince myself to stay quiet, to stay safe. But I noticed the one in front. A small figure, no taller than a child, leaned down, reaching out slowly with a trembling hand. My stomach twisted when I saw it press something against the wood. I couldn't see what it was, but I felt a wave of dread that made my knees buckle. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I had no way of knowing. When I finally found the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty. Every single figure had vanished, leaving nothing but silence. My pulse still raced as I scanned the floor, hoping for some rational explanation. That's when I noticed the candy bar lying neatly in front of the threshold. I froze. Its wrapper glimmered faintly in the early morning light. I bent down and picked it up, my fingers trembling. That S, when I saw it, my name scrawled across the wrapper in what looked like blood, messy and uneven, as though someone, or something, had been in a hurry. A chill ran through me that I couldn't shake. I dropped the bar immediately, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Even as the sun rose and the streets began to fill with life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air around my apartment seemed heavier, darker, as if the night hadn't truly ended. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see them return. The masks, the buckets, the whispering. They were no longer just a nightmare confined to darkness. They had found a way in, and now, every time I hear the faintest scrape, the softest whisper, or see a shadow move where it shouldn't, I remember the candy bar, my name, and I realize with a cold, sinking certainty that Beggars Night is not over. Not for me, not ever. The figures could return at any moment, patient, silent, and hungry. And when they do, I have no doubt I will answer.